Welcome to the Extra on KRDO News Radio. It is USAA Military Week, and today we are talking mental health needs for active duty military veterans and their families. Joining us today, Dwayne France. He's Director of Veteran Services for Family Care Center. Dwayne is a 22-year service member, also a combat veteran, both in Iraq and Afghanistan, and he's a national certified counselor with 3 years of experience counseling veterans and military service. And Kirsten Belair is Behavioral Health Program Manager. She is with Mount Carmel Center of Excellence. Graduated from UCCS right here in Colorado Springs. That is awesome. Your dad was a Vietnam veteran, and you were working as a clinician in the community when you decided you want to dedicate your time and education and knowledge to active duty military and veterans. Thank you both for coming in during Military Week. Dwayne, we've talked with you before. Thank you for coming in.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And Kirsten, thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Now, there is a lot we could talk about with this topic, and we were kind of talking about it, before we came on the air. And Dwayne, we kind of talked a lot on the last time that you were here with Dr. Field. But let's start with probably the topic that a lot of active military veterans, community members, family members talk about. And it is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and TBI. And we were kind of talking, and I mentioned to you both, I thought I saw an article, and I was generalizing, so kind of generalizing the article about PTSD with some of the active duty military, and there may have been a reason for being medically discharged. Is that kind of the summary of it, or is the military kind of looking like, was that the reason?
I think recently there has been a lot of focus on recognizing PTSD, and not just PTSD, but a lot of the other mental health concerns as a reason for medical discharge. Really over the last 3 or 4 years, even as far back as 2010, when I was active duty, I was first sergeant of a company that had medical discharge, and a good portion of ours, at least a quarter, were for PTSD and traumatic stress and depression and things like that. And so the military has done a lot better of a job to be able to recognize these as medical concerns for discharge. And at the same time, it's very hard to separate problem behavior from mental health concerns. And so there's also been a lot of focus on veterans or active duty service members getting out with they call bad paper, less than honorable discharges, which hurts them,
Right.
which could have been tied to their mental health concerns.
That's interesting. And like you said, and instead of kind of looking at the overall picture, right, Kirsten, it's kind of like, okay, they were discharged, but was it connected to that? And I want to kind of touch on PTSD, and you were talking about traumatic stress, Dwayne, and it's not just somebody, I mean, you do see it in a lot of combat veterans, right, and combat active duty military, but even people that may have not been directly involved with combat, say, but are associated with it, can still deal with some of the things with post-traumatic stress disorder.
Absolutely. PTSD has quite a few, well, at least the diagnosis has quite a few criterion, and one of them is that you must have been exposed to an actual trauma or traumatic event, but the exposure can be direct, witnessed, or indirect. So like even having a relative or a close friend, or for example, like Dwayne and I in the professional fields that we are, being re-exposed just by stories and hearing of the traumas that have occurred can sometimes lead to some PTS or PTSD.
And is that kind of the same thing as traumatic stress? I mean, the same thing. Is it separate post-traumatic and traumatic stress? Are they kind of the same?
It really exists on a continuum. I mean, there's a natural reaction to when somebody is exposed to trauma, and a very immediate psychological reaction, but it becomes post-traumatic stress disorder when it's long-lasting. Right. I think a month or more, right? Yeah. So if it doesn't resolve itself quickly and it becomes sustained, that's when actual, in science, studies have shown that actual physical structures in the brain will change after that long of a...
After that month, right, or longer.
Yeah.
It will actually, the brain will physically change.
Right. And so structures
Wow.
in the brain, the amygdala, the hippocampus, the limbic system will actually physically change, and that's when it develops into a disorder. And so anything that really, when you notice these things after trauma, and if they are sustained for a long period of time, that's when you need to really kind of seek some help. And that's when the difference between just traumatic stress reaction and then developing into a disorder.
Interesting. And we were and Dwayne, we have talked about this before, and Kirsten certainly feel like jumping in here, but the stigma associated with PTSD for our soldiers, our active duty soldiers. I would think that some of them feel they don't want to reach out for assistance, for help, for guidance, for counseling, and for veterans who are still struggling with it. It could be because of a stigma they feel.
Absolutely. I know in working with, for example, active duty, some of them still feel concerned about opening up and speaking about their mental health issues due to the repercussions that they either perceive have happened, have experienced on a personal basis, or have heard reports of. But this is not just currently. I mean, this is eras. I work with Vietnam veterans who really struggle because when they came back, the message that they seemed to receive was, we don't talk about it. And so for 40, 50 years, they've learned not to talk about their mental health. And if you did, then you were perceived as weak or there was something wrong with you. And that it can be a cause for concern if you have a battle buddy who I'm perceiving or other people are perceiving as weak or not able to fulfill their duties.
And again, that can lead to even bigger. And I remember reading one of your articles, Dwayne. You've written several articles and posts on PTSD and going beyond PTSD and TBIs. But that, I think, if not treating it and looking at it, like you said, it can turn into traumatic stress, can turn into post-traumatic stress, but that can even lead to bigger behaviors for not speaking with someone, getting help.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's sort of a vicious cycle. A veteran or a service member thinks, I couldn't handle it, and so I can't really talk about it. I'm embarrassed. But that leads trying to handle it on their own. Substance use disorders is a big one. Figuring out that, I can't talk to anybody about it, but if I drink or if I, take these pills, it helps give some relief. I mean, it's a false type of relief, but it's a type of relief from what they're going through. And so there's a lot of more challenges, and it's not all just tied to traumatic exposure. A veteran, a service member, doesn't have to have been exposed to trauma or even gone to combat to be able to have some challenges in their transition.
Right. And when we come back, I want to touch on TBIs, traumatic brain injuries. We know we have had soldiers return from combat with dealing with those, and that's a whole entirely different I don't even want to say beast, but it's an entirely different area, and we're going to talk about that when we come back. We're talking with Dwayne France, Director of Veteran Services for Family Care Center, Kirsten Belair, Mental Behavioral Health Program Manager at Mount Carmel Center of Excellence. You're listening to The Extra on KRDO News Radio. Welcome back to The Extra on KRDO News Radio. It is USAA Military Week, and today we are discussing mental health needs for active duty military, veterans, and their families. Joining me, Kirsten Belair, Mental Behavioral Health Program Manager for Mount Carmel Center of Excellence, and Dwayne France, Director of Veteran Services at the Family Care Center. And I know in the time we have, we are kind of just touching the surface of, we just touched the surface on PTSD, and now we're going to move into TBIs, traumatic brain injuries. And Dwayne, you were making a very fascinating point in the break, and obviously, but I never thought about it. PTSD, when you're dealing with, and there's different types of traumatic brain injuries. TBIs will generally be in association with PTSD.
Sure, absolutely. It's one of the things, if you consider common traumatic brain injury events or improvised explosive devices. And so blast waves and concussion or a vehicle rolling over or things like that. Veterans will be running towards a firefight and smack dab into a tree. But these things will cause traumatic brain injury, but they're also closely involved, if not intertwined, with events that also could potentially cause post-traumatic stress disorder.
And you were touching on equipment from 50, 60 years ago, right, to equipment today. You're actually seeing an increase in traumatic brain injuries because before those would have been fatal.
Sure.
So now we have active duty military veterans who are coming back from service overseas in war zones with these traumatic brain injuries.
Right.
And we were talking about, sorry, try not to cough here. How do you diagnose that, and can it be diagnosed? Exactly. Can you exactly pinpoint and go, that's a TBI?
I think that's a great question, and kind of a complicated answer. I know that technology nowadays can absolutely map and see the brain and can see physiological damage. However, there are some times where scans don't pick up like mild TBIs or progressive or multiple mild TBIs, which in that case, you're looking at more symptomology, whether it's changes in behavior, problems in thinking, headaches, dizziness, or anger, isolation. Some of those things that we would associate with PTSD can actually be
A
indicative,
TBI.
yes, of a TBI. Exactly.
And like you were saying, it is symptomatic.
Yeah.
And we were discussing, I sadly had a former, he's a great guy, former neighbor, veteran, and he was a demo guy. And he suffered multiple TBIs. And it was hard for him. It was very hard for him. And luckily he sought out help. And one of the things we've talked about with both PTSD and TBI is actually coping with it, dealing with it, confronting with it. How do family members support it? And it comes to, doesn't it, reaching out for help?
Right, it does. Many veterans resist against accepting my limitations, or I don't want to accept that I have a disability. That's not something that they did in the military, and so it's hard for them to accept that I will be less than what I was. Instead, really helping a veteran say, I'm going to succeed and even thrive in spite of my limitations. So it's really overcoming, and not just the physical disabilities. A TBI is definitely a physical disability. But just the emotional changes that happen, and okay, things are different now. How do I thrive? How do I live in my world in a happy and pleasant way, in spite of what I experienced?
And I think in tandem with that, if I may, is the family and the family's perception of that person and how the family is dealing with the difference and the change and saying, I had you before and now I have you now and it's different. How do we deal with that? How do we interact and relate to each other?
And that takes the family reaching out as well to, like, I need help. I need tools to help with my family member. Because like you said, it could be, and we had talked about this before we came on the air, the person they were before when they went into the military is not the person they were coming out.
Right.
And that in itself, I'm sure, is a hard thing. But then you add PTSD or a TBI to that, or both, and that adds a whole nother layer, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I was talking a while back to my wife, and I say, I work with veterans who come back from combat changed, and those veterans really need help. And she was like, "What are you talking about, those veterans, big guy?" She was like, "He's like," and she was like, my mom noticed it. And yeah, I mean, things we're changed by our experiences, we're changed by what we see, we're changed by what we do. And it's not all for the negative. There is a factor of strength and growth and resilience that are developed, but it's still a change, and that change has to be managed not just by the veteran, but those that support the veteran
and surround and love that veteran. And sadly, I'm sure in some instances it does not work out that way. There are some instances where it does become difficult to challenge or to handle and maintain. And again, I think it's everybody involved with that veteran, that family member, getting help.
Absolutely. I see, some veterans who are struggling, whether, again, PTSD, TBI, or just the transition phase. And one of the things that they do is they isolate. And they do that because what I've heard is I'm trying to protect my family or protect others from my struggles. But when they isolate, then again, they're isolating themselves from the help that they could be receiving.
And again, that's making it even worse, isolating themselves, isn't
Absolutely.
it?
Yeah, and it isolates the family as well. And so if the spouse or the children, now they're not going out, they're not doing, and then they begin to think that this is something that they're dealing with on their own as well.
Right.
And so the spouse thinks that she's the only one or he's the only one that's going through this with the service member. And so it's just sort of like a withdrawing. Just from society really, but just from other interaction, and really that's when reaching out for help, and spouses, caregivers, even veterans themselves. You know what? I'm not the only one going through this. Man, I can do this. It's a little easier if I don't feel so alone.
Absolutely. And when we come back, and again, I know we're just touching our toes in all of these topics, but when we come back, we are going to talk about transitioning. transitioning from military life into civilian life can be a challenge. So we're going to talk on that with Dwayne France, Director of Veteran Services, Family Care Center, and Kirsten Belair, Mental Behavioral Health Program Manager from Mount Carmel Center of Excellence. It's USAA Military Week on the Extra on KRDO News Radio. Welcome back to the Extra on KRDO News Radio. It's USAA Military Week, and today we're talking about mental health needs for active duty military veterans and their families. Joining me, Kirsten Belair, Mental Behavioral Health Program Manager, Mount Carmel Center of Excellence, and Dwayne France, Director of Veteran Services, Family Care Center. And again, I just want to preface this like we're barely dipping our little big toe in the water of what we've talked about so far this morning, including PTSD and TBIs, traumatic stress, and more. But I also wanted to focus on transitioning. That is a big deal. And sometimes it takes a little bit more than the U.S. government going, thank you, soldier, for your service. Have a good life. Now, I'm not saying that our military does not provide transitioning services, because they absolutely do. Mm-hmm. But sometimes more is needed.
Absolutely. On I think on two aspects of that. Not only the transition services, like on base, they are equipped on giving them the resources and sometimes the connections, which is fantastic.
Right.
But there's a transition within ourselves as well.
Right.
For example, paychecks may be different, pay may be different. The way that I'm going to communicate with my employer or my coworkers may be different than when I was active, for example, because there's just a different culture out there, as well as what am I going to do with myself if I've been in 20 plus years, let's say, and I'm retiring. Am I going to fully retire my life, or am I going to continue on? I mean, we may be in our 40s or our 50s, and we're not done yet in life.
Right.
And so we want to feel helpful. We want to feel productive. And how do I transition there as well?
Well, and we've and we were touching on this off air, and Dwayne, it was like you were saying, like, for a lot of military members, and it may have happened with you, you're a 22-year veteran of the military, your life was on post. You went off post to go grocery shopping, watch a movie, but everything was on post. That, for some, has to be a hard, very, I would say, structured life. And then now you're out. Can that cause not cause problems, but I'm sure that transition can be sometimes hard to manage.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's the military is a separate culture. I mean, we have a lot of familiarity here in Colorado Springs, but we have our own way of dressing. We have our own norms, our own values. We have our own language with the acronym thing, right? You know, we have our own, and unfortunately sometimes the cursing, right? So we have a different way of communicating. I often tell people it's like I went to go live in England for 22 years. We speak the same language, but it's a totally different culture. And then I come back here to live in Colorado, and I have to reacclimate my culture to something that I may not be as familiar with than what I used to be. And that can definitely cause some challenges whenever we actually are trying to essentially to reacclimate, to learn a different culture, but also to help people understand where we come from and really just the different way that we might think.
And do you see that, Kirsten, with transitioning, do you see that more with family members of military members transitioning out, or is it more community?
That's a great question. I think it's all of it. I know military, the family members serve just as well as the military service member, right? So the family is changing, the military person is changing, as well as the community, because coming out, for example, Dwayne, I love sitting next to you right now. So Dwayne may come across as very direct,
right?
Very clear. For some people could become like seeming abrasive. He is not abrasive, at all, but they're used to, let's say, talking more directly. So that's a big change. Just to move into, let's say, deployments. All of a sudden, wait a second, we're not moving every 3 or 4 years, and we're going to establish community
I can imagine
here.
That's a really big
different.
Transition.
Right,
yeah, establishing roots.
Right.
Exactly.
I was having a conversation with my son the other day, and somebody had asked me where I'm from, and I say, of course, Missouri. My wife's from Tennessee. But I said, if somebody asked you where you were from, what would you say? And he was like, well, I was born in Germany, but I don't remember that. And we spent time in Maryland, but I'm not really from there. But it's so military kids don't have a place that they're from. right?
Yeah,
I mean, just
yeah.
something natural to be able to say,
Absolutely.
I have roots in this location. The military, my wife traveled. She left Knoxville, 18 years ago, and has traveled with me, and ended up in Colorado, where neither of us thought that we were going to be. And so it is a very different lifestyle for the families as well as for the veteran themselves.
So that transitioning applies to everybody in the family, basically, and yeah, that can be hard. And so, and I want to, because I want to also time. We have time, you guys. We don't have a lot. But what are some of the biggest things that you all are seeing when it comes with transitioning for our military members and veterans?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I see quite a few things. One is with any change, right, we're going to have some type of loss or change.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I see is they lose a sense of the brotherhood. There's a tightness within your unit.
A family. It's like losing your family.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And we don't have that anymore. And the actions and decisions that you made while serving were important, very important. It could have meant life and death, whereas in civilian, it may not seem as important, or people don't perceive it as important. So what does that mean about me?
Right.
Do I have personal importance? A heightened sense of responsibility, and like the clear, and I'm going to, for lack of a better way to say it, I guess, the power differentials of, if I'm in and I have a commander, then that person supersedes me.
Right.
Right. But here I go out into civilian life and I have an employer. Well, they might not have that clear power differential. So now we're more equal. What do I do with that? Who do I listen to? Who do I follow?
That's interesting.
Yeah. And a big thing is a lot of people think that, mental health professionals, that's just in the realm of PTSD, TBI, maybe
And that's just
depression
not
and stuff.
true. Yeah.
But there's an entire branch of existential psychology that talks about purpose and meaning, finding purpose and meaning, and finding that plus above the norm instead of just reducing the negative. And so that's where a lot of the veterans that I talk to, it's not about the trauma, but it's about refining how do we refine that purpose and meaning in our lives.
Redefining yourself, basically.
Yes. Yes.
And that's where mental health professionals have the training and experience to be able to come in and help them with that, because we're almost like a knowledge nexus or experience nexus, because we have the clinical training and we have the experience to be able to say this is common and this is how others have been able to overcome it.
Well, and I have a good friend whose husband is in the military, and he's a good year or so from transitioning out, but that's already a struggle. Already a thought process. Isn't that right? When you started thinking, Dwayne, I think I might start after 22 years. Didn't that even knowing that it was
being aware of it, I call it leaning very far forward in the foxhole. I started planning 4 years out. My wife and I started thinking about it seriously before I went to North Africa in 2013. So almost 2 years out. I was very much prepared, and I still wasn't really prepared for it, but I was really starting to try to focus early on. And I had a long lead time because I was really prepared. Some veterans find out 1 month, they're out the next month. It is a quick turnaround.
And that I'm sure can create an even bigger, okay, my life was just, my rug was just jerked out from underneath me. Now what do I do?
Yeah. And some have to leave without choice. It's not their choice. If they had the choice, they would stay. But the circumstances say you can't. So then the change is forced upon you. And that's harder sometimes to embrace if you're not planning and accepting and opening to it.
Wow. See, there's a lot we could talk about. You guys, we could just keep going, but sadly, we only have one more break left, and we're going to talk about, of course, services that you all provide. And I want to touch on, and I love Dwayne's look on his face, the 4th of July holiday. We're going to talk about that when we come back. Talking with Dwayne France, Director of Veteran Services, Family Care Center, and Kirsten Belair, Mental Behavioral Health Program Manager, Mount Carmel Center of Excellence. It's USA Military Week on The Extra. Welcome back to The Extra on KRDO News Radio. It's USAA Military Week, and today we're talking about mental health needs for our active duty military veterans and their families with Dwayne France, Director of Veteran Services at Family Care Center, and Kirsten Belair, Mental Behavioral Health Program Manager for Mount Carmel Center of Excellence. And on that note, I want to put the check mark. Both of you are partner networks with the Peak Military Care Network. They were here yesterday. And so just wanted to, for everybody that listened yesterday, both Family Care Center and Mount Carmel Center of Excellence are partners with Peak Military Care Network. And before we go, and we only have a few minutes left, there were some things I wanted to touch on and to clarify. And Dwayne, you brought up a very good point. There are great services when there's, a military member is active.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the transition out, and then there's a wait for VA services. And what you guys do offers a great fill, doesn't it?
Right. There's community support that can really fill the gap until we can get the veteran connected with ultimately what their long-term care can be and probably even should be, the support that they were guaranteed. And so we, the community members who are we call it culturally competent and understand military and veteran mental health, can provide that support to bridge the gap.
And we were talking really quick, and Dwayne, you deal with more veteran services.
Mm-hmm.
And Kirsten, you have also dealt with active duty military as well.
Yes, absolutely.
So both, I mean, you, again, Dwayne, more veteran, but active duty and veteran both at Mount Carmel as well, right?
Yes.
So let's go ahead and, Dwayne, let's start with Family Care Center.
Mm-hmm.
What services does Family Care Center provide for our military members?
So the Family Care Center is an outpatient mental health counseling agency. We're primarily TRICARE. We provide a lot of support for spouses, active duty spouses, and children. But we have over 20 clinicians. All of us are familiar with veteran and family member military mental health. We also have an affiliated nonprofit called the Colorado Veterans Health and Wellness Agency that helps us provide support for those veterans that maybe don't have insurance or there's, and we call them cracks, but they're usually, gaping chasms in support for what veterans. So we have that affiliated nonprofit. We actually just received another grant from the state of Colorado that will be able to allow us to continue to see veterans.
Excellent.
And to be able to connect them with what long-term care.
And let's go ahead and Mount Carmel Center of Excellence, a lot of services. But again, you manage, Kirsten, the entire mental behavioral health program.
Right. So I love that. That's actually two different, not different, but what am I trying to say here? Sorry. We have a lot. Yes, we have a lot. So let me start with some of the overall services that we have. We have transition services. So if people are transitioning, we have peer navigators who can help them not only with their resumes, but getting with LinkedIn, connecting, networking. We also have a VSO in-house, which is really awesome. He has a really high success rate. If you're looking to change your benefits, we have educational and legal services as well as financial services. So again, with the transition process, what does my future look like?
Right.
Do I want to go back to school? What are my finances going to look like? Is that going to change? Am I dealing with legal changes as well? And so overall, we have that service. As for the behavioral health, we do have individual, couples, family, child therapy, group, and yoga. It's a trauma-informed yoga that we provide. We don't require insurance. We don't require referrals. Discharge status doesn't matter. We welcome all eras. We ask for a $10 donation, but that can be waived on a case-by-case basis. And again, the yoga is free.
And to get in touch, and then I want to leave with a final thought from each of you. But if they would like to get a hold of Family Care Center.
So the easiest way is to go to our website, which is www.fccsprings.com. And our the grant-based services and everything is able to be found there on the website.
And of course, Kirsten, for Mount Carmel.
Yeah, you have the option of either going to our website as well, which is mountcarmelveterans.org, or you can call us at 719-309-4714.
And I want to just kind of leave with the final message from both of you. I mean, again, we've touched on a lot. But we've also touched on stigma of dealing with, say, PTSD, TBI, transition stuff, depression, traumatic stress. But it takes a person to want to get help, doesn't it?
It does.
So a final message you would give to maybe a military member, veteran, or family member who really thinks they need help.
So I think the biggest thing is if you find yourself struggling, if you find yourself experiencing painful emotions or unpleasant emotions, or if you find other people telling you that, then there are resources out there for you to reach out for help. That's going to be the biggest thing, is you don't have to be this way. It doesn't have to continue to be this way. Veterans have even the responsibility to be able to take what they learned in the military to make their community stronger, to make their community
Absolutely.
better. Here in Colorado Springs, look at how many service members have gone on to be able to do really great and wonderful things. And so every veteran has that capability and probably even the responsibility. And so sometimes we can get off track. Sitting down with a mental health counselor doesn't mean that you're crazy.
Right.
It means that maybe things aren't going as well, and you can probably get some help to make them more well.
And Kirsten, for you?
Yeah, a couple of things. One is just encouragement that the community, especially here in Colorado Springs, again, we do have a lot of services and community partners, and we do care. So there's people who care about you and your well-being. And if you have ever, I heard this from somebody I was working with, ever felt like you're standing in a crowd of people, but you're like on an island screaming and nobody hears you. If that's ever you, it's you don't have to do it alone. There are professionals as well as just family and people in the community who care about you. So reaching out and not isolating, and then it doesn't have to be hopeless.
Excellent. I am so glad both of you were able to come in today. Dwayne France, Director of Veteran Services Family Care Center. Kirsten Belair, Mental Behavioral Health Program Manager, Mount Carmel Center of Excellence. Again, I know we just kind of touched the surface on some of this, but hopefully we did help, and help somebody, hopefully encouraged if they need to get help, to get help. Thank you so much. And then coming up tomorrow, we are going to talk about transitioning out a little bit more into the real world. We're going to talk about employment, transitioning. We're going to talk with Mount Carmel Center of Excellence. Also, Pikes Peak Workforce Center, they'll be here as well. USAA Military Week continues tomorrow on The Extra on KRDO News Radio.